Board of Commissioners is the governing body of Clatsop County, all county service districts for which this body so acts, and as the Clatsop County Local Contract Review Board is now meeting in regular session. Please join me for the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. May I have the roll call, please?
Here.
Here.
Here. Here.
Okay, looking for a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
So move. Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Agenda is approved. Tonight we have a presentation. Tonight we're going to have a presentation on our long-term financial plan. Welcome.
Good evening, Commissioners. I have with me Rob Moody from Plan B Consultancy. He's here to present the findings from the long-term financial plan review that they did, and so I'm just going to turn it over to him.
Thanks, Monica. Chair Lee, members of the Commission, thanks for having me tonight, and thanks for making time in your agenda. So, basically, we were engaged with the county to take a look at and assist staff in updating the long-term financial plan, and we broke that into 6 key tasks. The second task there, assess county infrastructure, was pulled out and is being treated separately. We're actually working with your Public Works Director on that project currently, and we'll wrap that up here hopefully in the next few days. Then we combined numbers 4 and 5 that had to do with operational and financial plans and policies and treated those as a single area. What I'd like to do tonight is just walk you through each of these areas real briefly and touch on some of the highlights of the report that was issued. Feel free, if you have any questions, to just go ahead and let me know. We can answer those as we go along if you like. So in terms of financial condition, this was focused mostly on the general fund, and it had a couple of sub pieces with it as well. And we took a look at the county's cost allocation plan. We looked at it really from 2 perspectives. One was to take a look at compliance with requirements for federal funding, as well as budget law and financial reporting and how it supports budgeting and financial reporting. And then we also looked at it for methodology with respect to some of the respective allocation bases for allocating those costs. Our conclusions were that it appears to meet all of the compliance requirements that it would relate to and adequately supports those other processes. We believe that there might be some opportunities to simplify and streamline some of those allocation bases a little bit, and we made a couple of recommendations to staff where there might be a department or a program that has a couple or 3 different allocation bases. They might be able to just use one and not have a significant difference in those allocations. So it just hopefully makes it a little bit simpler to administer. It's probably worth a fresh look at some of those bases. We also looked at similar entities with respect to alternative revenues. We took a look at the potential for a local income tax or a local sales tax as an additional revenue source to the general fund. What we found is that there really aren't any other localities or local governments or county governments in Oregon making use of those. I believe that there is a statutory opportunity, but nobody is taking advantage of it currently. Multnomah County does do a business tax. Depending on who you talk to and whether their business is located in Multnomah County or not, they can tell you how successful that is in terms of economic development versus raising money for the county.
Could I just hold you up there a minute?
Sure.
So economic development, I mean, I'm delighted that staff has worked on this. I mean, this is, for me, one of the most significant things we could possibly do. We had an idea. We were in pretty good shape with things, but to have somebody come in and look at best practices and recommend, that's really just wonderful. And I'm always thinking about what somebody told me, that Oregon tax law is such that we can't keep pace with inflation unless we do economic development. Is that within the scope of what you looked at or outside it?
You know, I would say it's peripheral. But basically, I think what you're referring to is Oregon's tax system is primarily property tax driven. Mm-hmm. Property taxes have they're statutorily limited to 3% growth on assessed value per year, plus any growth.
Right.
So if you're experiencing economic growth in terms of building and property development, et cetera, those kinds of things can help spur your property tax revenues. That's really kind of as far as we took that.
Okay, thank you.
A couple of other areas that I understand that the county is, at least looking at is, with the recent legalization of marijuana in the state, a lot of counties and local governments, cities for that matter, have taken advantage of that to implement a marijuana tax, if you will, and see that as an additional revenue. Not getting into the politics or the rights or wrongs of that, it is an opportunity for additional revenues to a local government in Oregon at this point. A couple of other things that are really kind of outside of our scope, but that occurred to me as I was driving over here really is there are some local communities in Oregon that have a local gas tax. Obviously, the proceeds of that are restricted typically for road use and to support maintenance and construction of roads, but it is potentially an opportunity to have another source coming in and then redirect some of the general resources that might be going there. And then finally, local option levies are another opportunity. Sometimes, obviously, they need to be approved by the voters, but sometimes those can be ways of generating additional revenues and allowing you to redirect general resources. So those are the kinds of things that we looked at and thought about in terms of our evaluation. The next thing that we looked at was we did a little bit of trend analysis around the general fund. We looked at revenue distributions across a 5-year period and looked for changes in that distribution. And what we found was I feel like I'm saying distribution over and over, but the distribution of revenues across by source was fairly steady over that 5 years. Property taxes started out at around $7.5 million, growing at 3%, or about 3% a year, to a little over $8 million at the end of the 5 years, pretty much as expected. There was no surprises there. We looked at timber revenues specifically, and I'll get to that again here in a minute. But in general, and there's some charts in the report there, you'll see that it was pretty steady year to year. Personal services costs for the county, there were some increases over the 5-year period in personal services costs, driven either by the collective bargaining agreements or just, typical inflationary pressures. What the county was able to do, though, for the most part during that 5-year period is offset those increases with vacancy savings and internal restructurings. So we didn't see the kind of growth in personal services over that 5 years that I kind of expected, knowing a little bit about how, what a typical growth pattern is in local government in Oregon. So the county's been able to, recognize. Now, those savings don't come without a cost, obviously. Operationally, there's some impacts and some costs that maybe don't get reflected in the financial statements or in the budget, but that was really kind of the offset, that those vacancy savings offset some of those increases.
If I can, so are you on page 6 of your report, page 11 of our packet?
I'm actually not following the report specifically. I'm just kind of working off of this outline. Did you have a question with respect to page 6?
Well, you said these offsets over time may impact the service levels of programs within the general fund. And then kind of skipping ahead to the end, you looked at key performance indicators, because we know that we have a very conservative, frugal staff. And then how do we balance that with service needs in the community? And again, that may be outside your scope, but I think that's what I'm considering that we should be looking at.
Sure, and I will talk a little bit about key performance indicators and how to make those a little bit more, hopefully, meaningful in terms of driving performance.
Right. Just looking at the trends and trying to
Sure.
get the big picture and look at it all.
If I don't address your question, bring it back up again.
Thank you.
In terms of general fund balance, you've had the opportunity really to grow your general fund balance over the last 5 years. The rate of growth in revenues has outpaced the rate of growth in the expenditures, and a lot of that is personal services. Personal services are about 73% of total expenditures in the general fund, which is what you'd expect in a service type industry or in government in general. I've seen it as high as 85% of general fund expenditures in some local governments. It depends on how much capital and how much other things that you're doing. The result of that is you have a fund balance of about $5.8 million, and it's about 37% of expenditures, which are benchmarks that are paid attention to typically, and those are set, there's some best practices out there that sort of refer to those types of levels. The commission's target for fund balance in the general funds, I believe, set at 25%. You hit that in 2013 and have continued to provide yourself some flexibility and some sustainability by growing that beyond that 25%, which I think is going to be valuable to the county and important as you start to look at some of the initiatives and the strategic things that you have coming up in the next few years. Another thing it really does is it gives you some flexibility and some options when you start talking about ways of financing projects, or if you're looking at a new public safety facility, for example. It can complement a borrowing strategy, it can supplement a borrowing strategy. You can do some creative things that you just don't have that opportunity if you don't have those reserves available to you. It can also allow you to do some inter-fund borrowing rather than having to go outside and pay current interest rates. I'll talk a little bit more about that too when we get into some of the financial policies, because if you're going to do inter-fund borrowings, you really should have some real clear policies about terms and interest rates that you charge yourself internally. It's just good practices, good financial practices. But I do want to stress that having a good solid general fund balance and some of your reserve balances that we'll get to in a minute gives you that sustainability, and it gives you that flexibility in the options as well, that just a lot of other local governments that we see just don't have that. They just don't have it. And so you're really fortunate in that mode that you've weathered the storm, if you will, since the recession in 2008, and you've bounced back probably better than a number of your counterparts in Oregon.
Don't you think that's because of, and I think it was in the 80s when they started setting aside timber revenue to shield us from the ups and downs of the industry. I mean, that was brilliant on their part, and it's helped us all these years.
Yeah, your treatment of timber revenues has obviously worked for you, where it's widely publicized, some of your counties in southern Oregon that relied on those timber revenues, and now that they aren't at the extent that they had previously. I mean, Curry counties and had some real problems.
And we were very fortunate they had the foresight to do that.
I would agree. Okay, next. So I'm going to shift away from the general fund now a little bit and talk about reserve funds and special revenue funds. So special revenue funds are established under state local budget law for specific purposes. And for financial reporting purposes externally, there's some requirements that they have to meet in order to be presented as special revenue funds. I won't get into all of the finer attributes of external reporting because probably nobody but me cares. But your funds, we looked at each of your funds in terms of how they were, or why they were originally established, how they're currently being used, and do they still fit kind of within that framework. And we found, yeah, I mean, the county's doing what they said they were going to do with those funds, and they continue to treat them that way, and they continue to be viable for those purposes. We believe that they're basically in compliance with all of the requirements of budget law as well as financial reporting. And again, you've got some strong reserve balances in specific areas that allow for that sustainability and that resiliency, if you will, in areas like the road fund and some of those reserves that are going to serve you well as you continue to pursue initiatives. I mentioned that you're strong relative to other local governments. And the other area that it will help is obviously if you go out in the market to finance some of these major projects, the rating companies look at not only the general fund and the general fund operations and balances, but they'll also look at relevant or related reserve balances. So that will serve you well in the ratings of your potential debt. Current practices, I guess to focus a little bit on that special projects fund, we looked at that fairly carefully at the request of staff with respect to kind of how it's been used, how it's set up, and how timber revenues have been flowing in and out of it. So the current practice within that special projects fund, or I'll say the current practice when we started the review, because I think it's probably changing as we speak, as you get ready to go into budgets in December or January. Timber revenues would be received into the general fund. Then they would be transferred from the general fund to the special projects fund. They were budgeted for projects in that special projects fund, as well as a balance maintained. Kind of whatever was left over that wasn't needed for projects was being maintained in that special projects fund. And then a portion being transferred back to the general fund for kind of specific operational purposes that were identified. Kind of this circular route, if you will, to kind of managing those dollars. So, and there was this kind of stabilization account concept that has been discussed and dealt with and administered through the budget process. Well, in, I guess, concurrence with best practices and financial reporting requirements, stabilization accounts are to be reported in the general fund. So what we proposed and recommended to staff is that we simplify this. The monies come into the general fund and simply transfer only the amount to the special projects fund that is needed to fund those projects that are identified in your CIP or in your capital planning. Maintain the rest of it in the general fund and then report your stabilization account there. It just,
What would be the advantage of that? I mean, if it's worked as well as it has so far, why would you change that?
it'll reduce a lot of the administrative and accounting headaches that it's not easy sometimes to track transfers back and forth, and if you can eliminate those transfers, eliminate the budgeting that goes with them, eliminate the bookkeeping or the accounting requirements that it takes to track those things, it just saves on everybody in terms of effort and time, and I guess making sure that you do all those calculations and support those transfers, whereas if you're only going to make the one transfer over to cover capital projects, that's pretty straightforward.
But isn't it my understanding of the reason that they did this was so that we didn't have that, we could learn to budget more frugally and not say, oh, it's a great timber year, so we're going to spend all that money, and then the next year we have a poor timber year, and we don't have the money, and we have to lay off staff. So there was kind of a firewall, my understanding, that this money was reserved and we didn't count on it. It was in reserve for capital funds, not specific capital funds, but for capital spending.
Go ahead.
It was anything in excess of the 15-year low was transferred to the special projects fund for any capital projects, as well as to kind of build up that general fund stabilization account. And so we would, we would discuss all of this and decide if we want to change the policy. But if we did make changes, then what we would do is we would still only budget the 15-year low for our operations. And then anything in excess of that would just roll into that unappropriated fund balance. So we wouldn't budget to spend those monies, which is essentially what we're doing in the special projects fund right now, is we're only budgeting to spend those timber dollars that get transferred in there. We're only budgeting to spend a certain amount, and then the rest of that is essentially rolling into the unappropriated fund balance in the special projects fund. Now it would just stay in the unappropriated fund balance in the general fund.
But there'd
Does that
still
make
be a
sense?
firewall of sorts.
Yeah, because unappropriated fund balance, that's not something that we could bring before the board to do a budget adjustment to spend those monies.
Yeah, it requires, under state law, it requires an act of God, basically, to occur in order to come
Literally.
before the board. It
Well, I
requires-
I obviously you understand this more than I do, but I think that the wisdom of what they did is why we're in the position that we're in, and, why fix what's not broken, so.
Yeah, and I think, you can comment, Rob, but I think we're not changing the concept of what was done, we're just changing the mechanics.
That's correct. Yeah, it's really a
The
mechanic
same
thing.
firewall and everything's still in place, we just do it a little bit differently in terms of a balance sheet transaction, if you will.
You said that much more simply than I did. I appreciate that. Thank you.
And it's something else too, where it's called the general fund stabilization account, but it sits in the special projects fund. And so now it would be the general fund stabilization account sitting in the general fund.
So we'll get rid of one of those labels.
Well, you would still have the general fund stabilization account. It would just be in the general fund instead of being the general fund stabilization account in the special projects fund.
It's going to be in the right place
Yeah.
now.
And it saves money on bookkeeping, which is the point.
Okay.
I'm sorry, did you have another question?
Well, and we don't make money, we have no interest accruing no matter where it is.
The monies are in
Yeah,
investments.
you're still earning interest, whether it's in one place or the other.
Great, so there's no differential. Thank you.
So just, again, just to touch briefly on that general fund stabilization account, the purpose of having a stabilization account is to provide for a smoothing in times of volatility, either increases or decreases in costs. And it'll be there, like we've explained. It's just the mechanics of maintaining it in the general fund as opposed to special projects fund. So you meet all of the requirements for maintaining a stabilization account under generally accepted accounting principles, and it requires specific. You'll have to identify specific conditions in which you would spend those monies.
So I'm from Detroit. I think of it as shock absorbers.
That's not a bad way of looking at it. Okay, shifting again to the next set of tasks. We took a look at the operational and financial policies and plans of the county. And I'll just kind of hit some highlights here. In terms of debt policies, clarifying and sort of refreshing those policies in terms of considering in your funding decisions the current versus future benefits of projects should enter into your consideration of whether you're going to do a pay-as-you-go type of funding or if you're going to borrow. Typically, you match, if the benefit is primarily to current taxpayers or current constituents, current ratepayers, then a pay-as-you-go type of scenario makes sense. Whereas if the benefit is stretched over a number of years or generational, then it makes sense to borrow the money typically and spread that cost over those benefited generations. Does that make sense? So if it's a longer term, let's say you're going to do some sort of system expansion,
Okay,
then those types of things make sense to consider debt as a financing alternative, because then the people further down the road that are getting the benefit of that expansion also help pay for it.
okay, because that was the only thing that I could think of was system development kinds of cost. Okay,
Also, we looked, as I mentioned, at interfund borrowings and kind of bulking up your policies and refining your policies with respect to interfund debt. Oregon law allows for interfund borrowings for both operational and capital purposes. It sets specific limits on the term in terms of how long those things have to be repaid. And it doesn't set any specific guidance in terms of interest rates, but most local governments use whatever they're earning at the LGIP or their average investment earnings.
so I had a, when you talked about the debt policies,
Yes.
you talked about looking at a negotiated sale, which, you know, and trusting that county staff is very skilled at looking at evaluating those. Are there any risks or downsides to that kind
You
of
know, there are
thing?
risks in either one. And I'm not here to provide you any kind of legal advice.
Okay.
Negotiated sales may work in the county's benefit, specifically if you're not in the market a lot. So for example, the city of Portland or Multnomah County are in the market a lot. The state of Oregon is in the market a lot. They benefit from a competitive sale because they're widely known in the market. They have bond ratings that reflect that. Whereas I worked on a deal with the city of Independence, for example. They're small, they're in the market maybe once every 20, 25 years. A negotiated sale, they believed, got them a better interest rate than they could have gotten competitively from investors and underwriters who had no idea where the city of Independence was, let alone who they were.
Like a known factor somehow, and
Yeah,
we're
so
not.
there are pros and cons to each side. It really comes down to having the right people on your team, and staff has the right people on their team in terms of bond counsel, financial advisors, et cetera, that help make those conversations happen.
Okay. So then going on to when you talked about the interest rates, I wondered, are there any, GASB, or other requirements to identify those in the annual budget or some other report, just so we're kind of tracking those?
They are
highlighted?
fully disclosed in your annual financial statements, in the bond, in the debt footnotes.
Okay. Fine print.
Okay?
Okay.
So then moving into the budget policies, again, kind of looking at those one-time versus recurring resources and costs. It's, you know, one of the tenets of accounting, if you will, that matching principle of, if you have one-time resources, for example, the reserves that you've established, if you spend those down, they aren't necessarily coming back. They may, but it takes a long time, right? If you get a grant, for example, a grant can be a one-time type of deal. What we saw I'm going to date myself here, but back when I was the finance director for the city of the Dalles 30 years ago, you know, the COPS grants were out there, which was, you know, fabulous. You know, you get 75% of this officer's salary paid the first year, and then 50%, and then 25%. And then you were on your own, and you owned this guy. And how are we going to pay for that then? Those were the critical decisions, but it really kind of brought home this concept of one-time costs versus one-time resources. So it's something to think about as, again, as you refresh your policies and take a look at that and see if that's consistent with the philosophy of the commission. Okay?
So, under fiscal and debt policy, the sentence is required reviews and approvals for administrative practice for the county, but not specified in the written revenue policies. Are you saying that they should be specified?
I guess we're suggesting that you consider it. Again, those kinds of things are really, they're broad and they're sometimes vague by design in terms of best practices to allow that give and take or that flexibility between the Board of Commissioners and staff. But the board's job is to set that policy and let staff then implement it, but there has to be that clarity. And I guess we're just saying it's something that should be part of the dialogue. Again, the contingency fund balance policies that you have, we talked a little bit about just kind of bulking those up a little bit, formalizing those. Again, if you're going to spend down some of your fund balance or your reserves, do it strategically and have that should be driven by priorities of the Board of Commissioners. And I think that's consistent with what you guys have always done. Formalizing it in policy just helps with that.
I had a question, and I'm on page 26 of our packet 19 of your report. Recommendation 9, operational budgets align with critical priorities and current needs in its programs and departments. We've had critical emerging needs that I kind of caught me by surprise, I think, in terms of the extreme nature of our housing shortage and, you know, all of the information about the Cascadia subduction event. And so again, looking at how do we balance fiscal prudence with being responsible stewards for the people in the place. And I mean, it's an ongoing
Sure.
discussion.
And what your fiscal policies and your debt policies and all of these things that we took a look at, what those are meant to do, they're not necessarily going to ever solve those problems for you. I mean, I'd love to be able to tell you how to do that. But what they're designed to do is to try and give you better information and timely and accurate and complete information with which that you can make at least informed decisions. A lot of local governments that we have worked with in the past don't have a long-term financial plan or don't have any sort of strategic planning beyond their annual budget. Yeah. It's very difficult to make solid, informed decisions with a horizon of only a year.
Yeah, it's impossible, really.
It's pretty hard. So you're very lucky to have the staff that you have, in my opinion, from your county manager all the way down to be able to have that foresight and implement your plans in such a meaningful way. That's my plug for staff. She didn't pay me for that. So now a couple other things on policies and plans. I want to be mindful of your time. Capital assets and infrastructure, again, an opportunity to sort of take a fresh look at those policies, maybe enhance them a little bit, align them with some subtle changes that have occurred in capital asset reporting requirements over the last few years. Your CIP, and I know this is kind of in its infancy here, but you've got a real opportunity to take that and make that a really meaningful document. And so we provided, some comments or some recommendations about things that you would want to consider as you develop your CIP as really a communications document. Mm-hmm. A lot of people say we're going to spend X number of dollars on infrastructure or on capital assets per year. What they don't do is consider what are the maintenance and operations impacts of those projects that also occur. The best example I can give you is I live in Sherwood, and we built a grade school a few blocks behind my place probably 15 years ago now. And the school district was so excited that they had built this school, and they came in $1 million under budget. Well, when September rolled around, they could only open half the school because there were no operations dollars to hire teachers for the school. And everybody was like, well, what about that $1 million? Well, it's restricted money. It can only be used for construction or to pay down the debt. There was a lot of unhappy people.
I imagine.
My kids went to that school, but it's too late to think about those operational impacts once the project's done. So having that built into your CIP helps you and helps staff make informed decisions about how to phase that stuff. It also gives you a real opportunity to match your financing plans with those strategic capital needs. One of the things that we're doing with the infrastructure piece that we're working on now is trying to identify those years into the future where it's most likely that the county could benefit from a debt issuance to match up with those costs, and how they can use their reserves with debt and all sort of a projection out of how you might match those things up. So aligning your CIP with your strategies and your priorities and your financing gives you a real complete picture that I think helps you get at some of the things you were just talking about.
Good, thanks.
Okay? And then finally, key performance indicators. The county does a nice job in its budget document of having what we would call performance measures. There's a lot of data there for specific programs. What we saw was a lot of data, but not a lot of tie-in of that data with what do you do with it? You know, what do we do with this data? What does it mean? How do we use that to make decisions? You know, some things are easy to count, so people count them. Just because you can count it doesn't mean it's meaningful necessarily. An example would be, you know, just taking a look at those and asking, why do we care about that number? What is it going to help us do? Miles of road paved in a certain year. It's pretty easy to figure out, but what does it mean? Well, does it mean something in terms of dollars of deferred maintenance that's pushed out, or savings in terms of maintenance in that area for the next 15 years? Those are the kinds of things that help you make strategy decisions, both, you know, at your level for policy and at staff's level for implementation.
Is that what you're talking about when you said the difference between output and outcome?
Yes. Yes. Outputs are those numbers. The outcomes are what you can do with that information. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's really kind of, in a nutshell, what we were able to work with your staff in terms of putting together the update to your policy. Are there any other questions that any of you have?
Of course.
Pardon?
Of course there's
Of
more.
course. I'd be disappointed otherwise.
So the workload measures and outcome, is that's similar to what you just said, the output that would be similar to workload
Yep.
measure. And then I guess when you were talking about the school, that's kind of, we can see an analogy with the possible new corrections facility. That we can have the building, but we also have to look at, for example, what the medical care costs would be with a larger facility.
Sure. How many additional FTE will it require? How much additional utilities costs? What kind of maintenance costs is it going to have year to year over its life? You know, what are you going to do about depreciation of the building over time?
Yeah, and I know on that one, I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but just to that point, I know that Chief Deputy Williams told me before the meeting, you're working on that right now, right? He is working on that operational plan. What's it
And
gonna
so
cost us?
would it also be including what we save by, ankle monitoring program, someone not actually being in the facility, but being able to be supervised outside of the system? Is that also included in the cost that we're saving?
Yes. Obviously, there isn't a county or a system in this country which allows for those that need to be supervised to be in a cell. So we still have, and honestly, there's a number of people that get in trouble that made a bad choice, that given the opportunity, i.e. an ankle bracelet, they will do just fine. They will continue to be productive members of society. They will still contribute. They're paying their due. And society demands of them, hopefully correct behavior so it doesn't occur occur again. So we'll be using work crew, we'll be using treatment, we'll be using electronic monitoring, we'll be using all of those functions that we currently are doing. Not to mention we're starting a pretrial release program. That will also continue, because really what we want to do is we want to get the right person in the box.
Right.
There's only so much room, and we don't need to be wasting dollars. Face it, jail beds are not cheap. We don't need to be wasting dollars on those that are not a direct threat to our safety and security in the community. So the whole gamut can still be.
So as you're looking at this, like he was saying, you'll be able to present that if we need to go and get money for this facility. Say, we are expecting to save this much money here and this much money here, and that will make the overall project look better. Is that what you're saying, is leveraging this kind of information?
Well, I think a good example would be work crew. We currently, because we have such a jail overcrowding issue, we have 2 staff members on work crew to work that, to give some relief and to say we're doing something. Well, we won't need 2 staff members, so we'll have the savings of $115,000 there that we're not spending on work crew. That'll then transition into the jail operations side. The increased reliance on parole probation dollars from the state would be another one where we're going to have savings there to then offset additional costs in the new facility. We haven't worked all that out yet. That's the direction we intend to go, again, so that we can make it an informed decision, because that's going to be something that's going to affect this community for 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
And this is a really important discussion, but one of our September meetings, I think the last one, I'm hoping that we'll have an hour-long work session just on the jail, and we'll get into a lot of this detail because we're starting to get a lot of information. So.
Oh, good, thank you. And can I go back a little bit in the first part of your presentation? On the animal control over the past 5 years, an average of 9% growth each year. This may reflect a resetting of commission priorities in this area or an increase in service levels versus prior years. What is that specifically, what is that referencing, the growth in services?
What page are you on?
It's on page 6 of the plan and page 11 of the agenda, of the packet.
We've identified specific things.
It's at the bottom of the page. the
Bottom,
very-
yeah,
Oh, right here.
We noted some.
we did some quite stiff budget reductions a number of years ago in animal control. I think been trying to rebuild that area, isn't that right?
Yeah, our sense was that there had been some reduction at some point, and now things were sort of
Yeah.
building back, adding maybe a staff person or two, and increasing their materials and services budgets over time that allowed, that accounted for that increase. It was just an observation more than anything.
Oh, no, it's an interesting observation. I was just wondering, because on the next page, they mention expenditures, and it just, expenditures hadn't been noted under the animal control, so I was just wondering.
Yeah, it wasn't necessarily trying to, we didn't have a necessary recommendation with respect to it. It really was just trying to identify some high points in the trends.
Thank you.
I don't have any questions, but this has been very informing.
Great,
I
thank
would have
you.
liked to have, when was the last time we did something like this?
The long-term financial plan, I believe it was back in like '07,
Right,
I think that's
so
right.
about 10 years ago.
yeah, so this has been a very helpful document.
We'd be happy to update it for you in a year or two if you like.
That was
Contract with me.
At a steeply discounted rate, no doubt, because
Are you
it's your
working at
work.
sales?
Well, I am a partner in the firm.
Thank you so much again. Is there any more questions? That was a wonderful, wonderful
Really,
report.
really
Thank you.
well done.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yep.
Okay, now we're going to go to a proclamation. And today we have a proclamation that we are going to proclaim support for the Public Health Department's harm reduction program. And I think Is Michael here today? I don't see Michael.
He is not
Wanna
here
handle this,
tonight,
Cam? Thanks.
but I know the commission has been very supportive of this in the past. I'm not sure if that's why Norma's here or you're just watching. But I would be, I'd be happy to answer any questions about this, but I know you had a pretty extensive presentation recently from
Yeah, we
Mike
did, and
about
this is, as I've said before, this is a really great program, and I support it 100%. I think this is a, you know, we're going to proclaim support, so I'd look for that motion.
And I just, before we do that, I just want to congratulate Michael McNichol once again for getting this grant funding. It's fabulous. So I'll make the motion.
Okay.
I move to approve the resolution and order proclaiming the board's support for the public health harm reduction program.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the resolution in order proclaiming the board's support for the Public Health Harm Reduction Program. Is there any further deliberations? Seeing none, all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Our next item today is business from the public. This is an opportunity for anyone to give a 3-minute presentation about any item on the agenda except public hearings, or any topic of county concern that is not on the agenda. People wishing to speak during business of the public must fill out a public sign-in comment card. They're over there. If you haven't already, please do. We have one citizen tonight to speak. Mr. McCartan, come on up and state your name and address, and welcome.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of the commission. My name is George McCartan. I live at 490 Franklin Avenue in Astoria. And I just wanted to mention that I'm not a big fan of spending thousands of dollars for outside consultants in various areas of the particular government, in this case the county commission. But I looked over the entire report, and I have to conclude, our manager was kind enough to tell me that you allocated $50,000 for this, and we're able to get this done for $38,250. And I'm not going to say it's a bargain, but I'm going to say that I think it was well worth it. There's some very excellent things proposed in here, and the proof, of course, is in the pudding. You clearly, according to the report, have done very well with your finances and with your financial outlook and your financial consensus for the future. But the proof is in the pudding, and hopefully with your outstanding financial staff, they will put into effect, especially the stuff like simplifications. These are, I think, important, not just for you people, but for the few folks that pay attention to how the money's being spent in the county or in the city or wherever. It's nice to have it a little more simpler. And I especially was grateful that they mentioned, with respect to the key performance indicators, we're now doing output, and it was suggested clearly that you start looking more closely at outcome. And with that, I will thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. That concludes business from the public today. Our next item is I look for a motion to approve the consent calendar.
So moved. Second.
Motion to second to approve the consent calendar. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Now we're going to move on to the business agenda. We have an offer for some county-owned property, page 75. Serpa, good evening. Welcome. May I have the staff report, please? Thought it was doing better this week.
Chair Lee and members of the board, from time to time, we get offers on parcels of property that the county has offered for sale but did not sell, and that is the case this evening. We have one small parcel in the Westport area, and we did get an offer on it from a gentleman. And it meets the minimum bid requirement and meets our county policy and Oregon revised statute. And I'm here to present you with the offer and hopefully get the property back on the tax rolls.
So this is a non-buildable landslide lot that backs, that it's got a BPA easement over it. I saw that. Yeah, it's pretty straight.
Yeah, it's got some constraints on the
Yeah.
uses, but
What does it mean, the Bonneville Power easement line? Is that overhead or it's underground?
overhead. So they limit the height of whatever you can grow underneath it. Mostly like pasture is preferred.
Okay,
They don't like forestation underneath those power lines and such, so.
okay, thank you.
Pretty straightforward. You didn't come up with any, you didn't see any issues?
No, and he's aware of where this is and
Uh-huh.
the easements and such.
Sure.
I appreciate the informational summary that you put in there, so that was very informative to me.
Well, if there's no more further questions.
Shirley?
Go ahead.
I move to adopt the resolution in order and authorize the chair to sign the deed.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adopt the resolution order and authorize the chair to sign the deed. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Have a great evening. Oh, wait a minute. I think you might be up here for the next one, too.
I'm here again.
We'll get this, okay, well, now we got item 8B, formal categorization of certain county-owned properties. May I have the staff report, please?
Yes, so our categorization committee met again. We took a look at some parcels that we had categorized for other government or for right-of-ways, and no right-of-way department wanted those properties, and the other governments were not necessary either. So we decided to bring them to you, to put them in the surplus or auction category so that we can offer them in the near future at a public auction in hopes of selling them and putting them back again on the tax roll. So the first 17-28 and 29 are both near the Glenwood Village exit, and they are in Clatsop Plains, and they are not needed for right-of-way purposes, so we're hoping that the adjoining owners will purchase those for their use. And then the one off of Irving and 29th, the city is not interested in that, and has adjoining neighbors to both sides, so we're hoping that they will purchase that and split it for their side yards. That would be an ideal solution for that one. And then the last one is in Warrenton. It is a berm or a dry area next to our wetlands, and it's not needed for our wetland mitigation. So again, that would be best to consider surplus and then auction that one off too as well.
I have a couple questions, if I might.
Yes.
I'm wondering on the, on like the 1729, you've got the highlight that it's a long, narrow thing, and the same with the Irving Street. And you said that you hope that the adjoining landowners will buy that and split it. So would that be up to the landowners to split that, or how come the county doesn't like split that according to?
On the 29, it's the former railroad right-of-way, so it's the west and the east half of it. So on the east side of this is an easement for Turley Lane, but it is a private drive easement. It is not a dedicated county road. So,
But the shape of the parcel, that's just the shape that we have on our books, and so it gets offered up as an auction item.
yes.
You don't alter it until the sale, or if someone, two people want to come and buy it, they alter it.
They can alter it themselves, yes.
I mean, it's possible only one of the people there might buy that whole lot. You know, we don't know that.
Yeah.
So.
Seems like a good place for a bicycle lane, but. And then the land on the 1731, you said that was a higher, is that a buildable area, or?
It is a buildable area.
but there's no road into it, right?
No, it is, no, so we are hoping to put this together with other properties that they will then have access to it. We have some adjoining properties that we have already deemed surplus for auction at our last categorization. So then this will abut those, and then we will sell them all together as one larger buildable.
Oh, and there's an offer, isn't there an offer on this area?
Well, there isn't yet. Actually, this is just a little bit of cleanup. It should have been part of that last package that you approved, and frankly, I'll take responsibility for not getting that in here. But yes, it will be part of a larger piece of several, 2 or 3 pieces of property there that we do have developers that have expressed an interest in. But they're only interested if this is part of the sale. They're the ones that brought to our attention that we kind of left this out when we brought this before you last time, because they said, you know, that their interest in this would include this parcel as well.
Does it increase the value to have all these together, but once it's put into auction, the amount doesn't?
It does increase the value.
So is
Of
that
what
reflected
we're
in
going to
this?
ask for minimum bid, it does increase that.
Is that reflected in this offer here?
Pardon me?
Is that reflected in the, what you're having in the packet, that increased value is already reflected in there?
It will be reflected when I bring it to you for setting minimum bid and,
Oh, this is just to categorize it at
Yeah,
this point?
you're just telling us it can go out to bid, then we'll come back with recommended minimum bids, you'll approve those, and then we'll go out to bid.
Okay, all right, thank you.
If there's no further questions, I'll look for a motion to categorize the properties as presented.
Chair Lee, I move to categorize the properties as presented and authorize the chair to sign the resolution in order.
Second.
We have a motion to second to categorize the properties as presented and authorize the chair to sign the resolution order. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye,
Opposed? Motion carries.
thank you.
thank you.
Have a great evening. Our next item up is the approval of the reappointments to the Ambulance Service Area Advisory Committee, page 101. And I see this is prepared by Tiffany. And Cam, did you just want to elaborate on this, or any? These are 2 folks that are reapplying because, and there is no other. Seems fairly straightforward to me.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, the folks have served, they're interested in serving additional terms, and so they're being recommended to you for reappointment.
Chair Lee, I move to approve the ASAA Committee's recommendation to reappoint Jill Tillotson and Dwayne Johnson to the Ambulance Service Area Advisory Committee.
Second.
We have a motion to second to approve the ASAA Committee's recommendation to reappoint Jill Tillotson and Dwayne Johnson to the Ambulance Service Area Advisory Committee. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Our final item tonight on the business agenda is the approval of the intergovernmental agreement with OAH for substance abuse prevention services, page 105. Greg, good evening.
Good evening. Jill would be here, but she's at a conference addressing these kind of issues and not able to be here. And as the board can see by the summary that she put together, normally this wouldn't just be another IGA with the Oregon Health Authority. This is an IGA that is kind of new. It's always been included in our IGA with the Oregon Health Authority that the board recently approved of. But because the state did some moving around of the monitoring of this particular formerly Service Element 70, they have a separate IGA for this particular piece. So this is something that, well, I don't know that it's in the summary. This is money that the county has used for a number of years to support Jill's position. I believe this is about 0.65 of her position.
0.65.
So obviously, we would recommend that the board
Yep.
approve the IGA with the Oregon Health Authority for substance abuse prevention services.
So I see OHA restructured, and then they moving the state, okay, so this is just basically a housekeeping issue Yeah, I see.
All of these different entities are under the umbrella of the Oregon Health Authority, but they have different divisions, and now this is out of the Public Health Division.
Okay.
I have a side comment, if I may. I just read or not read, I saw there was a, I don't know where, it was on the radio, and it was talking about the term substance abuse is trying to get it changed over to substance use disorder, trying to take out that word abuse, but they were saying that statutorily there's so many departments and whatnot that have the old kind of names. It was an interesting, I don't know if you probably didn't hear that, but I don't know if it was on Fresh Air but it was a very good, talking about the power of language.
Yeah, there's a lot of similar things like that when you go to change a particular piece of statute. Certain people at the state are tasked with those jobs of finding where that word or those phrases are used in a multitude of other places. But
Just if they're changing the statute, it's like a kind of a missed opportunity, I think.
Okay, I'll look for a motion to,
Mr. Chair, I move to approve the intergovernmental agreement with the Oregon Health Authority for the financing of substance abuse prevention services, authorizing the county manager to sign the agreement and all future amendments.
Second.
we have a motion and a second to approve the intergovernmental agreement with Oregon Health Authority for financing of substance abuse prevention services, authorizing the county manager to sign the agreement and all future amendments. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
thank you.
Okay, let's see, where am I? So we're going to move on to commissioners' reports, and before we do that, I would like to recognize a guest tonight. Our newly elected Port Commission President Frank Spence is here today, and I would like to welcome you. Thanks for your service, and Frank and I had an opportunity to go out for lunch, and I'm very encouraged by the progress down at the port, and I wish you the best of luck, and thank you for being here tonight.
I'll be a regular.
Okay, yes, sir. And now we'll move on to commissioner reports. Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you, Chair Lee. I went to the Pacific Northwest Economic Region and the conference July 23rd through 27th that I said I'd be and missed last meeting. It was fascinating. They talked about collaboration, leadership, and innovation. They had an interesting fact about wildfires. They said it's drought and wind that are the least. Well, you probably knew that, but I thought that was interesting. And during the last session, on the last day, Jason Lewis Berry, the governor's economic development staffer, said two things that were, I thought, wonderful. He said, we should all move ahead with CLT, with cross-laminated timber, mass timber technology. And he said, we're committed to building housing in rural Oregon.
Good.
Well, that's worth the price of admission. So,
Yeah.
and I could say more, but that's enough for now.
Commissioner Sullivan.
Thank you. Last Thursday, or no, it wasn't last Thursday, it was July, it's hard to tell what, it's July 27th. We had the Northwest Senior and Disability meeting that I attended on the phone, and there's a lot happening with seniors in the state. It was a real nail biter with the legislature about funding, and there's changes coming up. But one thing that we did do is we just approved the contract for the company that provides the meals for seniors in Warrenton, the Warrenton Senior Citizens Incorporated Food Production. Previously, we had done the one for Astoria and Seaside. And then sticking with the seniors for a minute, I also attend the first Monday of each month. They have a senior care network, and it's great professionals that are there, and we talk about all different types of issues that affect the seniors. And some of them I have, one is the peer support telephone service. It's to have a place for seniors that are isolated or lonely, that they can make a phone call and have a voice to reach out to. And it's also a way to kind of screen people that maybe they need more services. The people that they talk to are trained, and so it's just now going live, but it's the Oregon Senior Outreach Peer Support Telephone Service, and I'll give this to Teresa for that. And then the other, goodness sakes, doggone it. Yes, they have a new, it's called Otago Exercise Program. It's a fall prevention program, and it's a way to go into people's homes and help them learn better ways to walk around in their home and strengthening exercises to help to prevent falls. Falls are a fearsome thing as you age, and it's a killer. So, and part of this program, I believe, is that they're working with physical therapists, but also physical trainers, so it'll be a little less cost. In this program, I have some information on that, and I'll include it in the public minutes also. And then on September 16th, there's going to be this has been going on in our community for a while. It's called Extraordinary Living, and they have it up at the community college. And they have all sorts of topics from what people can get involved with to living well, what about Medicare, how does that, all sorts of topics. It's a great event. The Astor Place is going to have a kind of a come in, see what Astor Place has to offer on August 17th from 5:30 to 7. And tomorrow, the Astoria Warrenton Chamber of Commerce, they have a after hours thing, and tomorrow it's going to be at the Senior Center here in Astoria. It's a beautiful new center, and you can look at that, and also they also serve seniors out of there. They do home meals, and they also do conjugate meals or people that come there. That's from 5:30, it starts at 5:30, and they do something with some kind of, they draw names or something, and the cash pot is now up to $500. So if you don't want to go just to see the senior, you can go and try to get some of that money. And then going back to forestry issues, the FTLC meeting that was supposed to meet on the 18th was canceled because of the solar eclipse. And thank you, Cam, for getting the information about the solar eclipse on our website. As we've talked about before, there's a lot of people in the state very concerned with the weather conditions and so many people coming into the state, what that's going to mean, potentially forest fires and whatnot. I heard a number today, they're shipping in rental cars because all the rental cars that are available at this point are taken. So they're bringing in 17,000 new rental cars to the state so people will have something to drive around.
Are we expanding the highway system too, just to hold those cars?
Oh, no, they're just going to get in their car and wait, I think. But one of the reasons and I was also going to attend the August 3rd subcommittee for the Board of Forestry. They're looking ahead to forestry management plans, but that was canceled also because of the conditions. Peter Doherty, the state forester, had to go out and manage what's happening in the state, and then Kate Brown, Governor Brown, as you know, declared a statewide emergency so that the resources would be available. I called Dan Goody's office, well, the Board of Forestry, the ODF's office, local office today, and Neil Bond sent a statement to me saying that the fire danger is still a threat in Clatsop County, that even though the temperatures have moderated, the humidity levels have come up, the damage has been done. The extremely hot weather that we had in the end of July and early August has really dried out the fuels. Statewide activity has been brisk. ODF sent a Type 1 team to Medford yesterday to manage the Flounce fire, and ODF staff have 3 separate large incidences throughout the state. But we are currently fully staffed, and I'll include this in the minutes too. And anyone driving on a forest roads are required to have a shovel and either a 2.5 pound fire extinguisher or 1 gallon of water, which I hadn't heard of that before. On private lands, no open debris burning. Burn barrels and residential campfires are allowed in ODF with an issued permit, burn permit, and until 10, and then they have campfires only in the metal, and they list those, and I'll put those in my thing. A couple more things. One is this is non-enforced fires, but on the Lynn County lawsuit, the Department of Forestry has up to this date spent $846,698.14 defending against this lawsuit. And this is money that would be going into management and operational funds for ODF that is no longer available because of this lawsuit. And the final thing is I served beef at the State Fair on Saturday for the fundraiser for 4-H, and Mayor Lemire was there, and as was Astoria City Councilor Tom Brownson and Bruce Jones, and it was fun, and they sold over 450 dinners. So hopefully that will do well by the 4-H folks. So I hope you all got to go out and enjoy the fair. I enjoy that every year. And with that, I'll be quiet. Thanks.
Yeah, good report. Thanks for the report on the fire danger. And you know, Mr. Press, you might want to, this is great, kind of informative. It'd be good to get that information out. The Commissioner Sullivan brought today out. You can take that if you want it.
And I'll be happy to.
Commissioner Neverker?
I have nothing.
Great. I've just got a couple things here. We had a Northwest Oregon Housing Authority meeting down in Tillamook, and we went to the old headquarters of the Tillamook Air Station. And Helping Hands, which is run by Alan Evans, has done a spectacular job bringing all these forces together, and they've created a Helping Hands Outreach Center there. They've got the first floor it's kind of like a recovery center. And the first floor has got a kitchen. They've got a wonderful pantry they put together all through donations. The building's become completely renovated and repurposed. It's been sitting, the flag had not flown on the flagpole in front of the headquarters building since like 1949. And it's flying now, and the building looks beautiful. The grounds, they got a huge grant to build a magnificent raised bed garden, which is going to be expanding. And so the Helping Hands Center is growing a lot of its own food, and it was just a wonderful tour, very inspiring. And of course, the conversation came up, though, well, we need to do this up in Clatsop County, and we're trying to do that. And we've talked here before about some opportunities there. So that was a really good visit down in Tillamook to see what the good work that Helping Hands is doing for our community. Couple important things. We're really close to the merger, and basically one of the sticklers of the merger was Clatsop Shores, which we've talked about extensively. NOAA is all ready to go. We'll probably be bringing to the next meeting here in the next month or two, we'll be bringing up the final closing deal to finish the merger. And we got a offer on the very difficult piece of seaside vacant land. But unfortunately, it's like $40,000, $50,000 underneath so we're a little underwater on that. And NOAA doesn't have a problem with selling that property at the loss, and we'll be able to recover some of that in some other ways, what we haven't quite figured out. But one important thing is that Clatsop Shores is going to be refinanced, and so we won't have to use the $600,000 of the trust fund. So as NOAA moves into this next thing, we're here, that $925,000, which we're going to have $600,000 available of that trust fund to invest in housing here in Clatsop County. And so that's a conversation that's going to be beginning, and I think that's really good news. And so that's 600,000, and we can leverage that to even do some more good work. And so I'm very pleased that to report that the NOAA board has worked really hard over the last couple of years to make this merger come together, and it looks like it's going to happen. And so I'm really looking forward to bringing that merger documents to this board here soon. And that's all I have. County Manager Moore.
A couple of things I did mention earlier. I would talk about the jail, and now's the time. As you know, we've been working with our architects to look at the youth correctional facility. First of all, try to determine if it was even worth looking at as a county jail, and they did come back and say, yeah, it could be converted. The next phase, which they're kind of at the end of now, was to then take a really hard look at that facility, do the detailed architectural estimates to determine exactly how many beds you could get in that facility and what the cost would be. So they came back, they were here August 1st. We spent 2 or 3 hours with them going through that. When I say we, Dave Diefenbach, our capital project supervisor, several people from the sheriff's office, Monica and myself. And there were a few changes that were made, and I actually literally just got the updated report back today. So what I would like to do is to have preferably an hour work session, because I think there's a lot to talk about, on September, prior to our September 27th meeting from 5 to 6. And I apologize to Chair Lee. I know I mentioned to you last Friday, I think it might be the 13th, but I met with the sheriff yesterday, and he is not in town on the 13th. And I do think it's critical that the sheriff be a part of this discussion. So he asked if we could push it back to the 27th. So if you're all okay with that. The architects will be here. The sheriff, the jail commander, all the personnel, people that we need to talk to, I think will be here. I did indicate, I talked to Scott late last week, and I also think it would be good for us to invite the city council from Warrenton, because this project is in Warrenton after all. And so if you're all agreeable to that, we'll have the beginning of what I'm sure will be a long and detailed discussion on this project. Let me just give you some basic numbers of where this thing sits right now. They believe that they can get 140 beds in that facility with work, but they can get 140 beds in that facility. Again, our current jail is about 60. The hard cost on that now is about $8.8 million. When you add in the soft costs, contingencies, if you've ever done construction projects, those are necessities. We're probably up about $11.5 million at this point. So that just gives you kind of some basics of sort of where this thing sits. I thought the discussion tonight on the long-term financial plan and your questions as it relates to the jail were pretty spot on, because we at that level we probably would have to finance, but we also would have a significant amount of money of our own that we might be able to put into this project if you chose to move forward with it. So let me just stop there, but we'll have a lot on September 27th, and again, I'd like to start at 5 so we get a good hour before the commission meeting starts. And again, we should have almost everybody here that we need to answer the questions that I know people will have. So I do want to talk about housing. I actually was at the Cannon Beach City Council meeting last night, and Frank Spence was there too. I was like, Frank, you follow me around or what? But we both were there last night. And I had talked to all the cities after we had the city-county meeting about a housing study. Everybody had kind of indicated some interest. The Cannon Beach Council asked me if I would come down and talk to them, which I did last night. They actually did vote, in fact, to appropriate $10,000 last night to participate in the study. Okay. So they were kind of the last ones I was sort of waiting to get in kind of official word from. So, we're going to try to get this thing rolling now. As I pointed out to them last night, that city-county meeting was on May 16th. It's almost 3 months ago. So, it's sort of time for us to get moving on this thing. I will circle back with the other cities, and we will be back in front of you. I think we'll need an MOU or an IGA agreement of some kind among the local governments to move forward on this, but I think we'll pick up some speed here. Just two other things mentioned briefly. I think somebody asked this question at a previous commission meeting. We are getting, as a result of the ballot measure that was successful in November, we are getting some additional money for veteran services. It's about $45,000 a year. We've had a couple of meetings with our current veteran service officer, Luke Thomas, and we've talked about, what can we do, with that money? How can we serve more veterans? How can we provide better services? We have a obligation to get our plan back to the State Veterans Office. I think it's October 8th, October 6th. So we're going to get something in front of you guys fairly soon in terms of what we might do with that enhanced money. And obviously the idea is to try to reach more people or serve more people. And but the state was fairly clear about that. They did provide a little guidance with the money. Here's what we're looking for.
Cam, in my Northwest Senior Disability Service meetings, board meetings, they almost every time they bring up veterans. So that must maybe that's some place that can also give you input.
They
serve veterans.
Really great because it sounds like maybe they haven't made that connection. But
and CLATSA.
Luke Thomas, he is our veteran service officer now. Now, he does tell me he does go to a lot of those organizations, mentioned CLATSA, Community Action, other things, so that as soon as someone comes in the door for help, they ask them if they're a veteran. If they are, they say, well, you need to talk to Luke Thomas. So maybe we need to make that connection there possibly. Because he does, in fact, go into senior facilities, works with a lot of seniors, a lot of veterans are older. And so, yeah, we'd be happy to follow up on that. But that's good news for veterans. It's good news for us. And we'll be back to you at probably one of the two upcoming meetings to get something in front of you that you'll need to look at and sign off on before we submit it to the state. And again, this is just how are you going to spend the additional money. So. The last thing, and I know this was just at our last meeting, the Seaside Urban Renewal. They have some, reasons, timing reasons, why they want to move forward on that fairly soon. And so we will be coming back to you, putting this on the agenda, with a staff recommendation again, probably at one of the next couple of meetings. So if you have any questions, concerns about this at all, the sooner you can let us know, the sooner we can follow up on those things. But otherwise, this will be back to you for decision before the end of September.
Great.
So that's it.
Great. Thank you for that report.
Thank you.
The meeting's adjourned. Everybody have a great night.